Welcome to the fifth episode of Literary Mojo. Let's move. Poetaster, a comedy by Ben Jonson, performed 1601, printed 1602. The play, a contribution to the so-called War of the Theatres, is Jonson's retaliation to John Marston's satire of him in What You Will. Set in the court of the Emperor Augustus, the main plot concerns the conspiracy of the Poetaster, Crispinus, and his friend Demetrius, who represent Marston and Thomas Dekker, to belittle Horace, who represents Johnson. The matter is tried before Augustus with Virgil as judge. Horace is acquitted, the dresser of plays, Demetrius is made to wear a fool's coat and cap, and Crispinus is made to vomit up his witty rhetoric. Marston and Dekker replied to the attack in Satyromastics, where the main characters of this play reappear. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, a poem which became a keystone of modernism by T. S. Eliot, written 1910 to 11, published 1915, and collected in Prufrock in 1917. Poems in Two Volumes, a collection of poems by William Wordsworth, published 1807, in which he continued his avant-garde attempt to set aside poetic diction and to write in what the preface to the lyrical ballads describes as the real language of men. The collection contains intimations of immortality from recollections of early childhood and I wandered lonely as a cloud. The Conscious Lovers. Conscious Lovers, the Richard Steele's last comedy, based on the Antria of Terence, performed 1722. The play was a success and influenced the development of sentimental comedy in England. The Puritan or The Widow of Watling Street, a comedy published in 1607 as written by W.S. and included in the third and fourth Shakespeare folios, but by some other hand almost certainly Thomas Middleton's. The play is a farcical comedy of Lenten manners. The Rehearsal, a farcical comedy attributed to George Willis, 2nd Duke of Buckingham, but probably written by him in collaboration with others, among who are mentioned Samuel Butler and Martin Clifford, Master of the Charterhouse, printed 1672. The play satirizes the heroic tragedies of the day and consists of a series of parodies of passages from these strung together in an absurd heroic plot. The author of the mock play is evidently a laureate, and Sir William Davenant was probably intended. But there are also hits at John Dryden. Bayes takes two friends, Smith and Johnson, to see the rehearsal of his play, and the absurdity of this work remains highly entertaining. It was one of the earliest of English dramatic burlesques. Amphitryon, a comedy by John Dryden, produced and published 1690. Adapted from the comedies of Plautus and Moliere, it represents the story of Jupiter's seduction of Alcmena in the guise of her husband, Amphitryon. He is aided by Mercury, who is disguised as Amphitryon's slave Sophia. The cruel abuse of mortal love by the gods is in striking contrast to the play's uninhibited eroticism. Queen Mab, a visionary and ideological poem by P.B. Shelley, published privately 1813. The poem is in 9 cantos, using didactic and descriptive blank verse, greatly indebted to Milton and to Robert Sathay's Thalaba. Despite its lyrical opening, invoking death and his brother sleep, and Mab, the fairy queen in her time chariot, the poem largely consists of attacks on monarchy, war, commerce, and religion. In place of these, Shelley celebrates a future of republicanism, free love, atheism, and vegetarianism. The verse is furiously polemical in style, with occasional passages of grandiloquent beauty. 17 prose notes are attached as appendices, many of them substantial essays against Jesus Christ and God the Father and the King and the bishops and marriage and the devil knows what. The work was extremely popular among working class radicals and ran to over a dozen cheap editions by 1840. Andreas, an old English poem of 1722 lines in the Vercelli book, based on a Latin version of the Greek apocryphal Acts of Andrew and Matthew amongst the Anthropophagi. It was previously believed to be by Cynewulf, but is probably later, towards the end of the 9th century. Religio Laici, a poem by John Dryden, published 1682. Written in defense of Anglicanism against deist, Catholic, and dissenting arguments, Religio Laici combines an exalted recognition of religious sublimity with a defense of a layman's reasonable and straightforward religious attitudes. Anelida and Arcite, an incomplete poem by Chaucer in 357 lines. It is set like the Knight's Tale in Theseus, Thebes, and draws more on Boccaccio's Thesida than on the sources it acknowledges Statius and Corinna. The simple story tells of the faithlessness of Arcite to Queen Anelida in 210 lines of rhyme royal as a preface to the elaborate complaint of Anelida in 140 lines of varying and accomplished metrical patterns. The Angel in the House, a sequence of poems by Coventry Patmore, published in 4 parts, 1854 to 61. The work is a celebration of married love, with lyrical and reflective passages linked by a narrative of courtship and marriage. The title, largely thanks to Virginia Woolf's Professions for Women, published in 1931, which spoke of the need for women writers to kill the angel in the house, quickly established itself as shorthand, now much challenged, for a stereotype of Victorian womanhood. Animal Farm. Animal Farm by George Orwell, published 1945. A satire in beast fable form on revolutionary and post-revolutionary Russia. The animals of Mr. John's farm revolt against their human masters and expel them, the pigs becoming their egalitarian leaders. However, dominated by Napoleon, the chief, the pigs become corrupted by power, and a new tyranny replaces the old. The ultimate commandment runs: all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Napoleon, ruthless and cynical, represents Stalin, and Snowball, the idealist whom he drives away, Trotsky. Boxer, the noble cart horse, stands for the strength, simplicity, and good nature of the common man, but he ends up in the knacker's yard. Annals of the Parish, a novel by John Galt, published 1821, the source of the term utilitarian adopted by John Stuart Mill. The Story of Rimini, a poem by Leigh Hunt, published 1816 and in a heavily revised version in 1844. The work is based on Dante's story of Paolo and Francesca. The work, with its flexible couplets, its use of both common speech and new words, and its luxuriant southern imagery, suggested new possibilities to the younger romantic poets. Blackwood's magazine, in attacking the Cockney school, derided Hunt's glittering and rancid obscenities. Annus Mirabilis, Year of Miracles. Annus Mirabilis, Year of Miracles, a poem by John Dryden, published 1667. The year he celebrates is 1666, and the miracles are Britain's victory in the Second Dutch War and the Fire of London. Miraculous because it was stopped before it destroyed the city. The Antiquary, a novel by Walter Scott, published 1816. The charm of the book, Scott's chief favorite among all his novels, lies in the character of Old Buck, based, according to the author, on a friend of his boyhood, George Constable, but a recognizable portrait of Scott himself, and in the minor characters. The Ascent of F6, a play by W. H. Auden and Christopher Isherwood, published 1936. First performed 1937. The central character, Michel Ransom, scholar and man of action, succumbs to his mother's persuasions and leads a mountaineering expedition up F6, a mysterious and hunted peak on the borders of disputed colonial territory. All his men die en route, and he himself dies as he achieves his mission, destroyed by his own self-knowledge, having rejected the possibility of evasion and the contemplative life. The establishment figures are presented satirically, the figures of the mother and the comrades with more ambiguity. Ransom himself was in part modelled on T. E. Lawrence, the truly strong weak man. The play is a parable about the nature of power, will, and leadership, with both political and Freudian implications, and may be seen to reflect the apprehension of and attraction towards the strong man in the 1930s. The Siege of Corinth, a poem by Lord Byron, published 1816. The poem is founded on the story of the Turkish siege of Corinth, then held by the Venetians, and it was the last of Byron's Eastern tales. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, a popular story by Washington Irving, included in the Sketchbook, published in 1820. Ichabod Crane is a schoolmaster and suitor for the hand of Katrina Van Tassel. He meets his death, or according to another report, leaves the neighborhood in consequence of being pursued at night by a headless horseman, an incident for which his rival Brom Bones is suspected of having been responsible. The story forms the basis of a film starring Johnny Depp in 1999. The Spirit of the Age. The Spirit of the Age, essays by William Hazlitt, published 1825, presented as a portrait gallery of the eminent writers of his time: Jeremy Bentham, William Godwin, S.T. Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Walter Scott, Lord Byron, Robert Southey, Thomas Malthus, Charles Lamb, and several others. The essays contain character sketches with lively critical assessments of the subjects, works, and summaries of their reputations, placed in the context of the political and intellectual ferment of their times. They are strongly animated by Hazlitt's political loyalties, especially in the sustained assault upon the Tory critic William Gifford for his ridiculous pedantry and vanity. The Snobs of England. The Snobs of England, a very successful series of comic papers by W. M. Thackeray, which originally appeared in Punch, published in one volume in 1848. A satirical investigation of thinking meanly of mean things, the work introduced the word snob in its modern meaning to the English language. Sohrab and Rustum, a poem by Matthew Arnold, published 1853. The story is taken from Firdausi's Persian epic. It recounts the fatal outcome of Sohrab's search for his father Rustum, the leader of the Persian forces. Rustum, who believes his own child to be a girl, accepts the challenge of Sohrab, now leader of the Tatars. The two meet in single combat, at first unaware of one another's identity, which is confirmed only when Sohrab has been mortally wounded. Sonnets from the Portuguese. A sonnet sequence by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, first published 1850. The so-called reading edition of 1847 was a forgery by T.J. Weiss. The sequence reimagines the growth and development of her love for Robert Browning, at first hesitating to involve him in her sorrowful invalid life, then yielding to gradual conviction of his love for her, and finally rapturous in late-born happiness. The title was chosen in part to disguise the personal nature of the poems by suggesting that they were a translation. A Soul's Tragedy, a play by Robert Browning, published 1846, together with Luria, as number 8 of Bells and Pomegranates. Its subtitle, Act First, being what was called the poetry of Schiappino's life, and Act Second, its prose, indicates both the play's genre, tragicomedy, and also its unusual form. The division of verse and prose represents Browning's idiosyncratic adaptation of Elizabethan and Jacobean models. Thank you for watching this video. If you like the video, please share and subscribe.